This is Barbara Phillips with Community Network Council. I'd like to welcome everyone to our third series, community series on critical race theory. This is a learning environment, and just to give you a little history about CNC, we've been around in Kent, Washington for about approximately 10 years. We work within this Kent School District, but expanded throughout King County. We focus, our main core areas is our academic coaching program, which is mentoring and family engagement. But also we have a series on professional development, several courses on teaching Black students where we work with Dr. Eddie Moore, and our coding program, as well as in development as our financial program for youth in the community. So the format today is Aubrey Shenholster is our vice president, and he will be capturing, looking at the chat. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat. You can raise your hand, but we will monitor the chat. Also, I'd like to welcome Dr. Adrian Wing, who's our speaker tonight. But now we will introduce Dr. Eddie Moore, who will introduce Dr. Wing, and we'll get started. Everyone, please mute their phones, though. Please, hello, please mute your phones, please. The 206-631-03154 is the number of you. Just mute, yes, thank you. So without any hesitation, I will introduce Dr. Eddie Moore. He's our consultant, educational consultant. We've been working with him for the past 3 years. He's co-authored the book, White Women Who Teach Black Boys, and we've had a partnership since then. So Dr. Moore, it's in your hands. Where did he go? Dr. Moore?
Here he is.
I'm here.
Okay, thought I lost you there for a moment. So it's in your hands.
All right. Well, hey, welcome everybody. We're going to ask everyone, if you're not talking, not asking a question, to please mute, just so we can cut out the background noise during the presentation. But we are going to have time for questions and answer. The format is, of course, Barbara's opening remarks. I'll introduce our speaker.
Yeah, it's a webinar, Molly.
And then
are you in?
Our speaker will.
I think so. It says it's recording and there's nothing on the screen.
Here's what I got.
Okay, could everyone mute their phones, please?
Aubrey, if you could help me just monitoring the mute, that'd be great. Okay,
yes.
Great. Yeah, so Barbara gave her opening remarks, and then I'll bring on our keynote. The keynote will talk for about 30-45 minutes, just giving us an overview. What is this CRT? What's been going on? Where does it come from? Why is it important now? I mean, any and all the questions we may have in reference to critical race theory. And if there's any questions missing, that's what the time afterwards will be all about. Let me, before I bring on the speakers, say again, I want to just be in recognition and admiration of Sister Barbara Phillips for her leadership in CNC, and all the members of the CNC staff that have been just courageously tackling and grappling with these issues, some of which are not so popular and you probably couldn't even do in some places. And so I think it's worth acknowledging this series, which kicked off about police and community, and then a real tough conversation last week around diversity and the changing dynamics associated with that. And now this week with CRT, and then next week we'll conclude with mental health, self-care. So welcome, everybody. It is my honor, my pleasure to introduce you not to a speaker for me, but a dear friend, a mentor, a colleague, a true sister. I started the White Privilege Conference in 1999 in Iowa, and it was hard to get people with letters behind their name to even acknowledge the conference. This sister not only acknowledged, but has been a part of supporting the conference through attendance, through bringing students, through being a workshop presenter, as well as a keynote speaker, and also just supporting me in my work and my evolution. I know I'm partly the professional I am today because of the influence and relationship with Professor Adrian Wing. And I can't think of anybody better that nobody knows that knows the most about CRT that I know. I want to say that again. A person that not a lot of people know about, but knows the most about this subject matter. And so I just really want to again salute and acknowledge Barbara and the team for being willing to trust me to bring in tonight's speaker, Professor Adrian Wing, coming in from the big city of Iowa City, Iowa. Professor Wing, it is so good to have you. If you could just give us a little bit about yourself before you get us into the subject matter, that would be great for folks to know a little bit about you and the work you've been doing over the years. And we, again, are so honored that you could spend this evening with us, dropping knowledge about a topic we've been seeing more and hearing more about than I think I've seen or heard about in the last 25 years. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moore. It's my pleasure to be with you all, wherever you all are in the universe. Sister Barbara, thank you so much for hosting this wonderful series. Brother Aubrey, thank you for dealing with all these technical issues. Hopefully the people are battling their way and getting in to this session. I'm originally from California, grew up in the New York, New Jersey area. I've been on the faculty at the University of Iowa College of Law for 35 years. At Iowa, I am a tenured professor. I am the Bessie Dutton Murray Professor of Law. I am the Associate Dean for International Comparative Law Programs. I'm the director of the university's Center for Human Rights. I'm the director of the Law School's France program. In other words, I wear a whole bunch of hats. And in terms of my academic specialties, I do race and gender and international law. So in terms of race, I have been involved with critical race theory since its founding. And as Dr. Moore said, or alluded, those of us doing it over decades, nobody was focusing on what we were doing. Even within law, very few people were really caring or noticing about our little niche. And of course, that all changed about a year ago. And so I was telling Dr. Moore, I may have done 75 talks in the last year on critical race theory to every kind of group, from children to seniors. And I'm about to do one for the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory. So it's a shame that a particular set of circumstances happened to get everyone's interest. But on the other hand, it's wonderful because people really need to know or consider what is critical race theory. So I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you. Of course, it'll be available afterwards when this is taped, and you can look it up. Right now, I have a blockage where I can't go to the full screen. But if that black bar moves, I'll do the full screen. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to what? Okay. I can't do the full screen right now. Anyway, so we're going to talk about the attacks on CRT, Then we're going to talk about, well, what is it really? And I'm going to give you some examples of it, including my own specialty, which is called critical race feminism, meaning the intersection of race and gender, i.e. how women of color are treated. I'm going to give you an example, some examples from education. I understand many of you all may be involved in the field of education. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the field of health, and then something we call praxis, which is the intersection of theory and practice. And then I'm going to end with the future. So first, here's a good question. Can anyone define critical race theory? I mean, you could Google and get 1 million definitions, and most of them are just nutty, crazy, wacky kinds of things. So first, let's see what has the media and the government said that critical race theory is. So we all got to know a little bit more about something called CRT, because last year, hard to believe it's a year ago, President Trump passed an executive order, and it was attacking critical race theory and white privilege training and certain things in the federal government. And everybody's like, why is he focusing on this at the end of his term? Obviously, he hoped he was going to be reelected, and who knows what he would have done if he had continued in office. And so, well, where did that executive order come from? He didn't think of that. There's a guy, you should definitely Google him, Christopher Rufo. He was the one that gave information and got it going. And he said he was going to declare a one-man war against critical race theory in the federal government. Critical race theory wasn't even in the federal government, no matter how you define it. But that didn't matter. The truth doesn't matter. What matters is how it gets constructed. So anyway, so Rufo is an influence. They then get the executive order. And this isn't just in the US. Other countries, leaders and academics in other countries were also against critical race theory, right? I mean, Great Britain, France, right? France was worried about certain social science theories from American universities. Australia. So in other words, you have to understand there's a conservative movement that's global, and that was deciding that it was worried about whatever critical race theory is. And you have to see this as intersecting with the 1619 Project and what it was trying to do and the education it was putting out. The 1619 Project is not part of critical race theory. That didn't matter. So it was attacked, and ironically, the main author, everyone knows, Nicole Hannah-Jones, she's a native of Waterloo, Iowa. And so this cartoon here showing the Republican elephant foot trying to stomp on Dr. Hannah-Jones is a symbol, right? Okay, so part of this attack is not just critical race theory, but an attack on anything to do with race. Okay, so then fortunately, a federal court blocked the Trump executive order. So it actually didn't come into effect in the federal government. So then when the Biden-Harris administration starts, President Biden immediately gets rid of the executive order. And then he issues another order that is advancing racial equity. And he has plans underway, his administration, that will, of course, be pro diversity, equity, inclusion, other things, et cetera. Nothing to do with critical race theory. Okay, so what was going on here? This name, you should know this sister. Sister Kimberly Crenshaw is one of the founders of critical race theory. She is a law professor at both UCLA Law School and Columbia Law School. And so I thought she has a good characterization. They lump together everything right? Including whiteness studies, talking about white privilege, etc. And what these all have in common is that they're all discourses that refuse to participate in the lie that America has triumphantly overcome its racist history and that everything is behind us. So that's what they're getting at. After George Floyd and all of the upheaval, Black Lives Matters, etc., last summer of 2020, they're like, okay, we got to get rid of this because there's too many educational institutions, corporate sector, etc., who are concerned with racial issues in America. So this attack on so-called on CRT was an ongoing effort to try to block this kind of emphasis. And as she said on the right, you see there where society's been structured from top to bottom by race. You don't get beyond that by deciding not to talk about it anymore. It will always come back. It will always reassert itself. Okay, so then you get all kinds of nonsense out there saying CRT's purpose is to make white people feel guilty, etc. It has nothing to do with that. And so it's trying to focus on understanding race and racism and how do we eliminate it. And, way back in the 60s, James Baldwin noted, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. So by the way, no, James Baldwin was not a critical race theorist. It didn't exist at the time that he was alive. Okay, so then, you think, this thing is over. Biden got rid of these attacks. No, well, instead, the Republicans who control the majority of states, state legislatures and governor positions said, okay, we're going to go after this through these states. And so there are now more than 20 states that want to ban what they're calling critical race theory in the schools. And Iowa is one of nearly a dozen states that has actually passed a law. Now, what's interesting, none of these laws actually mention the word critical race theory. They have all kinds of other terms that they're trying to attack. So you see the name there of the Iowa law that was passed, its name. And if you Googled and looked that up and you read it 10 times, it would not make any sense to you because it doesn't make sense. It is such a gobbledygook. And these laws were written from outside of the states and then passed to the states, which may not have done anything to them or may have tinkered with them and made them even more wacky. So what we're worried about now are all of these different states that may pass these laws. The ACLU has issued statements, and I've attended meetings of different civil rights groups where what's going to happen, there's going to be lawsuits over a lot of these laws. To the extent the laws focus on college level, at university level, you have things like academic freedom, tenure, etc., that give a lot of leeway to professors and to institutions. And then, of course, there's other things that in K through 12 that can be emphasized. And so even though you haven't seen this yet, there are cases brewing from different groups that will be attacking these laws. But meanwhile, okay, what am I supposed to do next semester if I'm going to teach something and I'm worried? Well, the lawsuits start because there's somebody that's going to get sued or somebody that's going to sue. So it could be Professor X wants to teach this course or starts it in the spring and gets fired, right? And that has happened in some K through 12 districts. And then so you get suits going that way. So we'll be likely to see some either this fall or next spring. Okay, so I've given you all that background. So what the heck is critical race theory? So it's a progressive movement. Progressive means it's left of center, right? A progressive movement started out in the field of law And it focuses not only on theory, critical race theory, but also on critical race praxis. What are the solutions to the problems of racism, privilege, subordination? It started in the 80s in law and now exists in many disciplines, including the field of education. And who knows, after my talk to the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, maybe they will come up with critical race theory in physics. So CRT is recognizing that racism's ingrained in America. It's not like a little side issue. It's pervasive. It's not just an individual issue. It helps you to understand power being based on white privilege and white supremacy. And of course, that has resulted in marginalization of people of color. So the whole concept of white privilege, for which Dr. Moore is has the major institute in America, in my view, that deals with this. This is totally intertwined with what critical race theory talks about. And so they were talking about it before Dr. Moore probably was in school at all, right? White privilege was being talked about in critical race theory. But now, of course, his work and other people's work, where you have this in many disciplines, many ages, all across the country. And I love this cartoon here because it's so typical. People with privilege don't see the path that they have has less obstacles on it than other people. So this material, a few of these slides I found online and they're quite fabulous. So misconception, CRT is the same as anti-bias, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not the same thing. It's an academic framework talking about power. Now, some of these things on the left are things people may use for trying to deal with the situations, but it's not just synonymous. And critical race theory didn't come out of doing anti-bias training or anything like that. It existed before the current round of anti-bias and other training. So here you see are some other misconceptions. It's not about just individualism, it's about systems. It does not blame white people for all the racial inequities. Race and racism are interwoven. It does not brainwash students with some socialist commie agenda. It equips the students to think critically of race, racism, and inequity. So critical race theory, it will criticize communism, socialism, capitalism, liberalism. It'll criticize anything. It is not up underneath one of these other things. The bottom one, that it's forcing educators to teach material that makes people feel uncomfortable. Well, that whole thing about do you feel uncomfortable? Part of education can mean you're uncomfortable. If you went through a whole life of education and never felt uncomfortable, well, then maybe you are not learning, or maybe you have no emotion. So critical race is trying to give you a lens to examine what you're going through. So, and you see here on the right, what it's saying as well. Okay, now I'm going to give you a list of items. And as I say, you can, of course, take a picture of this. You can look at this later in more depth than I will do. But people who believe in critical race theory believe that, racism is ordinary, not aberrational, that we will critique progressive thought, that it will come from left of center to critique so-called liberalism. It believes that race is socially constructed, right? There's no biological race. All of that is debunked, but race gets constructed. So in other words, people who are Arab and or Muslim in the US have been socially constructed as if they were Black, bad, terrorists, etc. And many people who are Arab and or Muslim could be white in terms of how they look, but they've been socially constructed as something evil or bad. Critical race theory is about noticing color, not colorblind. There's nothing colorblind about America. You have to notice color. You have to notice how race and racism are behaving. Also, in law, critical race theory believes the law is not neutral. There's nothing that's passed by courts or by legislatures that are neutral. Everything that's happening is based on who are the people who passed it. Historically, mainly white men with power, they pass laws for their benefit. The Constitution was built for them. It wasn't built for the majority of the people. And we've been spending a couple hundred years trying to make it answer for the rights of those it was not built to answer for. And so that's why it's been very hard. We believe that racism is like a cancer. So if racism is a cancer and not just like a bee sting, then you need some very serious remedies, right? Just putting a little Band-Aid on it isn't going to work. So if racism is like cancer, you may need to have chemotherapy, surgery, holistic methods, radiation. In other words, you need very heavy duty solutions to deal with the cancer of racism. Professor Derek Bell, one of the founders of critical race theory, he believed even that racism might be permanent. Everybody doesn't believe that. Obviously, it's very depressing to think forever is racism going to be there. But his view is maybe so. Maybe it's like alcoholism. You would always be an alcoholic, but you could control that. You can do things with that, even if you can't eliminate it. The next item, interest convergence, is something Professor Bell came up with, which is that people don't do things just out of the goodness of their heart. They do it because it's in their interest. So if you want to pass a law in a certain way, you have to make it in the interest of the people with power. Then they'll do it. If they don't see how it's in their interest, then they won't do it. So it's a very interesting theory, interest convergence. Critical race theory often uses what we call the narrative. Narrative is used in feminism and in other areas as well. In other words, not just reading a law case. Believe me, it's so boring. You'd fall asleep. It's just a nightmare. If you tell somebody's story, the story of Dr. Eddie Moore, or the story of any of you in a narrative, people can grip with that, right? People could relate to that, and then you can tell them about the law. But using the narrative is very effective, whereas regular law professors would look at the narrative, that's stupid, that's silly, that isn't really law, that's literature, get out. But anyway, critical race people use narrative. The term intersectionality, I'm going to mention in more depth in a moment. And it is that intersection of race, gender, and other isms. And I'll talk about that. I've already mentioned praxis. Another issue for critical race theorists is that rights are very important. Even if we can't quite pin down what the right should be, i.e. it's non-determinate, rights are important. Critical race theory is concerned with the rights of people at the bottom, people who are poor and dispossessed. And also, as I've also alluded, critical race theory is now multidisciplinary. Okay, I found a slide about critical race theory in education, in the field of education. And you see, this is coming from 1998. This is not something brand new. And you see very similarly, this was put together talking about how racism is entrenched, about dominant narratives in education, such as those need to be challenged. The experience of people of color is legitimate. You have to go across different disciplines, and CRT being involved with justice and eliminating racism. So I'm sure in every field that has critical race theorists, they will have come up with some arrangement that deals with those basic ideas here and the ones I was showing you. So everybody asked me, where does these words come from? Critical race theory, right? They come from particular places. So the word critical has a meaning, and it comes from critical legal studies, which was a movement of white men in the 70s who were very progressive, and they thought things going on in law school are not objective, everything's about power. And so they questioned whether law was neutral and objective. They were influenced by European postmodernists. And so that critical word is now put in front of a whole lot of different things to mean that the people are going to criticize or what we call deconstruct what's going on. So in law, there are people who became critical legal studies proponents, and these are some of the people in law who did that. And there are some books out there, you can Google critical legal studies. And if you can read any of those books and understand them, good luck, because they're what we call high theory. They were not written for most law professors, much less for people who are not in law. Anyway, this is where the critical comes. Then race theory, there were people of color becoming professors in law schools in the late 70s. And they were like, we're interested in critical legal studies, but you guys, and they were all guys, you don't have any race analysis. Everything you all talk about is class. And so people like Derek Bell come and say, lots of things are about race. Regardless of my class status, being a Black person in America does things to me that are just not the same, even though I may be a doctor or professor. So there are a lot of books on critical race theory. You can go on different sources. The book on the bottom left is a small reader that's more oriented toward the general public. The big red one and the one in the middle, they're very big and thick, and they're not meant for the general public. You can't just pick them up. And so I was an editor of one in the bottom in the middle, The Law Unbound, which is the work of Professor Richard Delgado, who's up on the upper right. He and his wife, Jean Stefancic, who are both legal scholars. And then on the bottom right is the late Professor Bell. Okay, so critical race theory I started as a law professor in 87. They have the first big workshop in 89. So I'm in there from the beginning. So now in law, critical race theory has spread out to a whole lot of areas, and there's various books and articles. We have something called Latino critical theory. We have queer race crit. We have critical white studies. We have Indian crit about Native Americans, Asian crit. E-crit is empirical studies. Discrit, people with disabilities. Desi-crit for South Asians. In other words, people from each of these areas was like, okay, critical race theory, it's fine, but it mainly seems to be about Black and white. And a lot of issues in America and the world are not about Black and white. So all of these have spun off and developed analyses. In addition to those, there's something called critical race masculinities, focusing on men of color. And then there's also work that's being done on Islamophobia and issues relating to the Middle East or Muslim people. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the area I said that's my specialty, critical race feminism. This is one of my readers. I don't know, it's not meant for non-law people, but it's focusing all on women of color and on that term intersectionality. And why is there a need for intersectionality? Because nobody's life is on one issue. You got many issues affecting you, whether you realize it or not. And intersectionality in every field helps you to see the multiple issues. So critical race feminism was inspired by both feminist jurisprudence, i.e. women who are law professors, right? Doing feminism like Catherine McKinnon and these women here. And then it was also influenced by what we call womanism, or things written by women of color, mainly Black women, but other women in other fields. And so in law, critical race feminists include Kimberly Crenshaw, the most famous, as well as some of these other women here. And we are looking at, in my work, right, I'm looking at not only race and gender, But the intersection of all of those identities, each one of those identities, every one of you has, and they intersect, and you can have privileging or discrimination against you simultaneously. So for instance, if you were someone not from the US, who is Black, who is dark skinned, who's from a minority religion, who's a single parent, who doesn't speak the main language of the country, who's very young, who's a lesbian, who has a disability and doesn't look what's considered attractive. So all of those things could be affecting how you're being viewed in the society, in the educational institutions, and in wherever you're working. Unfortunately, the economic situation of women of color, however you define them, is worse than for white women or men of color, wherever they're located. So it's quite sad that a commonality of all of the women of color is that they're at the bottom of the different groups wherever they live. Okay, so you have things spinning out of this. Kimberly Crenshaw has an organization, and one of its initiatives is Say Her Name. The fact that people don't acknowledge the fact of Black women being affected by the criminal justice system. It's not only men. So we've all heard of Breonna Taylor. And here, is something showing many, many Black women who were killed by the police, and most of their names you don't know. Also, critical race feminism would be looking at things like the gender pay gap that's raced and gendered. And as you would imagine, Blacks and Latinas are at the bottom of the pay scales. We also have global dimensions of critical race theory and critical race feminism. In the middle, there is a book, another one of my anthologies called Global, talking about women of color around the world. Another field, educational inequities. There's tons of graphs and charts that prove what I'm sure every one of you on this webinar knows, that people of color, children of color, are at the bottom in achievement, and they drop out at higher rates, and they end up in the criminal justice system. So there's many, many charts that show all the negativity. And on the collegiate level, the whole issue of affirmative action and whether it's good or not. My father on the left with my mother went to UCLA in the 1940s. UCLA and the University of California system got rid of affirmative action in the 90s. I went there in the 70s, and there were many people of color. And then when my son on the right wanted to go to UCLA, I said, no, I'm not going to let you go to a UCLA that has as many Black people as when your grandfather went there in the 1940s. Nevertheless, in the middle is like, oh, let's blame the Black person and not look at all of the privileging that goes to all these other groups who get into institutions. Another area we could use a critical race theory or critical race feminist analysis has to do with health, right? The whole COVID thing, and everybody's heard how people of color are disproportionately affected, women as a whole disproportionately affected in terms of losing jobs, being on the front line. I have had 60 relatives get COVID, 60 Black relatives and Hispanic relatives get COVID, 6 have died. Here are 2 of my relatives who died in the past year from COVID. My nephew Dion had 4 children. My aunt Bess Pruitt, many ailments and couldn't survive COVID, age 90. Obviously, a critical race feminist analysis could look at many other aspects of the health system. And we have maternal mortality rates that are those of a developing country because of how bad the rates are, the pregnancy deaths by ethnicity that you can see in these charts. I'm coming to the end here, and I realize we got to get to the questions. So then solutions, what I said, praxis. We need to have that intersection of theory and practice. So in my state, Iowa, Wayne Ford, a former state representative, came up with the idea that any law passed has to have a racial impact statement. And now other 21 states are looking at this. Another praxis for me as an international law person, I was involved in helping to draft 3 constitutions, including South Africa. And that is South Africa's equality clause. Imagine if our Constitution didn't have just race or color or that, but had all these different issues. These are the things I was mentioning to you earlier. Let's just say that's probably not happening in my lifetime, but maybe in the lifetime of some of my students or some of your students. Another praxis, the media, Brian Stevenson, NYU law professor, of course, best-selling book, but also turning that book into a movie that millions of people have seen gets you way further than any, big, thick book on critical race theory. So media is very important. So what do I advise you to do? There's many things you can do in your fields, but I hope you'll also look at Sister Crenshaw and her African-American Policy Forum, Google it and see their work. They're working now on tracking a lot of the anti-critical race theory legislation, etc. I'm sure each of you could talk about things in your field, and we all have to be dedicated to this. And I know it's depressing. I'm 65 years old. I have 17 grandchildren. It's very depressing. How can I be optimistic for them when I'm worried about their future? So even when I get depressed, I think of one of my heroes, of course, the late South African president, Nelson Mandela. And he said, "The struggle is my life." And he said that when he was in prison. He didn't know he was going to get out and be the first Black president and become a Nobel Prize winner. And so I use that as one of my mantras. We are not going to end racism, sexism, white supremacy, homophobia. We're not going to end any of those in our lifetimes. We will be judged, though, by the quality of the struggle that we each engage in at different points of our life. How you do that when you're a student, a young adult, all the way up to a senior citizen like me will vary. But we have to dedicate ourselves to that struggle so that we can try to make the United States of America be a place that it's never been, that it would work for all of the people in it, and not just continue to be a place that only certain people have privileges and are able to take the lion's share of everything. So I know you all will join me in this work. And I get a lot of strength from you all. I get it from my students. And of course, I get it from my children and my grandchildren. So I will stop here and turn it back over to Dr. Moore and let him get going for what we're going to do next.
Great. I'm going to ask everybody if you feel it. I'm going to give a little emoji myself, see if I can flash a little emoji there just to give a little celebration to Professor Wing and thank her for her contribution, giving us some knowledge. The one thing I've been saying consistently around this topic, Professor, is people passing legislation, it doesn't seem like they have any comprehensive knowledge of what this topic is. And so the one question I wanted to ask you first is, what's your sense of the people in power's competence around this subject matter? Because it felt like to me, I learned a lot and I still feel like I need to learn more. Do you feel like there's some competence involved in the legislation that's being passed?
There's no competence in it at all. The people don't understand anything. If you asked any one of them for 2 minutes to actually say something that is involved with critical race theory, they can't. But they're very clever. It doesn't matter. They're using this, as Sister Crenshaw said, just as this umbrella. We're against critical race theory. So what they mean is we're against any use of race. Anything on race, we want to stop it. And also, we all must remember in 2040, around that year, the majority of the country is going to become people of color. And this is talked about now in the media. And this is, of course, very scary for certain forces in our country who will all of a sudden be a numerical minority. So they're somehow thinking, if I put my head in the sand, or that would be the minimum. If I do everything I can against these forces that will soon be the majority, maybe I can stop it. maybe I can scare them, right? They can't arrest every teacher in the country, but they hope people would control themselves because they don't want to get attacked or fired or, something like that. But no, they absolutely know nothing whatsoever. I'm happy to talk to any group. I'll talk to any of them, but they don't want to know, right? They don't want to engage with reality. And so if somebody doesn't want to know, you can't deal with that, right? If they're saying the moon is blue cheese and they won't come off of that, well, it's very hard to deal with that. And a lot of them are literally in that zone.
Yeah, thank you for that. Aubrey, you can help me if there's anything that shows up in the chat, or if folks want to raise their hand to move to the front of the queue to be able to ask a question, please don't hesitate to do so. I also have a list of questions in case nothing comes from the audience. I just kicked us off with one of those, but let's pause now to see, Aubrey, did anything come up in the chat?
Yeah, Dr. Moore. So Joyce Stanford, you ask a question. I could read it, but I think if you're okay, I'll just unmute you and you can ask it directly.
That'd be great.
Okay, let me.
We heard you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
You can hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. I love both of you. I don't know you, but I love both of you. I live in Gig Harbor, where Christopher Rufo is streaming all of these lies and misinformation. I want to know, as a woman of color, and let me just give you a little background. I am a woman of color who lives here, a Black woman, lives in Gig Harbor. I ran for office in both 2018 and 2020 for my legislative district and did not win, but I'm in a somewhat blue conservative legislative district. And so here comes this guy now, this past, 18 months, I think he's lived here 2 years, and he's spreading all this misinformation. Give me some tools and some armor so I can shut him down.
Yes. In the US, we have something called freedom of speech, right? So, but freedom of speech has to do with the government, right? And what it can do. So he has the right to, talk whatever drivel somebody will publish, unless certain sources are like, well, we don't want to publish him, right? So when you have boycotts and campaigns against certain concepts, against certain people, against certain entities, where, those companies are like, oh, no, we don't want him. All of our constituency will leave us. Well, then they operate. This is what self-interest, the interest convergence. Entities will say, no, we don't want to have him speak to our group. He doesn't represent what we want. And the First Amendment does not cover you in a private job, right? 99% of jobs in America, you are an at-will employee. So you're all familiar with, there's countless people that have said all kinds of crazy things on social media and have been fired from their job that day or the next day. So I don't know who employs him. He's probably sheltered from that because whoever's employing him believes like him. But there have been people that have been shut off of social media, the most prominent one being, of course, Donald Trump. So we have to use the tools of our system to try to get those that would endorse him or give him a platform, to not do that. And the other thing is you fight speech with speech. So the problem we have now is like we're on the defensive. So these forces who are saying critical race theory is like the earth is flat, they're in the ascendance. And so you need people who are going to say, no, the earth is round, the earth is round, the earth is round, and try to combat the total lies with things that are the truth.
Okay, so basically we got to drown him out from the misinformation. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
I see another question, but I wanted to interject because Joy brought this up for me, and I'd love to hear your thought on this, Adrian, in reference to the toll that the pushback against these kinds of CRT constituencies are putting on our communities. And often the people of color, women of color, in fact, who are on the front lines of battling this pushback. So just wondering, are you seeing some of that as well in reference to, I was reading something about Kimberly Crenshaw herself, just talking about some of the toll this has been taking on her. And for yourself, self-care, what are some things you do to kind of take care of yourself when answering these often and more frequent kinds of anti-CRT constituencies?
You know, throughout my career from, you know, in the 70s when I was doing anti-apartheid and the civil rights, there have been people who, you know, say horrible things, want to kill you, threaten you. So I've always been inspired by our ancestors, right? Our sheroes and our heroes. Just look at what even happened in the civil rights movement when there were people, Goodwin, Schwerner, Cheney, you know, people who were murdered, right? People who were shot, who were butchered, whose houses were torched because they, you know, talked craziness like Black people should vote. And they gave their lives for that. So, you know, all of us doing things that are unpopular with certain forces have to think, okay, what if, you know, somebody could just shoot up my house? My children said, okay, Ma, you got to get alarms, you got to get cameras. Well, those things are not going to stop somebody, right, from shooting up my house. You may be able to look on the camera and see maybe who did it, but it's not going to stop the system. Oh, I'll call the police. Well, the police can be right in it. There's a long history that the police are so infiltrated that you know, that they're the last people I would call. So, okay, what do you do when you're under this stress? And if you look at famous leaders, right, they will, many of them are, you know, I got to do what I got to do. If I'm a martyr, then I'm a martyr, but I'm not going to back down. The average person is like, look, I have a family. I want to keep my job. I want to, you know, live a nice life. I don't want my picture to be on every, you know, website. And the use of social media is now so pervasive that people can find out about you in a way that wasn't possible before it. So what do you do about that, right? Okay, I'm at an age where I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And of course, I have a privilege because I'm a tenured law professor, right? And they cannot just eliminate me from the university. On the other hand, for self-care, that's very hard because I have always been a workaholic, but everyone needs to have some de-stressors. For me, it's taking a walk with my partner. It used to be writing poetry, of course, dealing with my children and my grandchildren, actually doing these kinds of talks. To me, it's what I call spirit warming. Attacks on you are spirit injury and could be literally, you know, physically injurious, but spirit warming helps you to deal with these different attacks. And so I'm always looking to do spirit warming things. So sharing this time with you all is a form of spirit warming. But I mean, there's no doubt, you know, Black people are dying, have always been dying at younger ages, male or female, than their white counterparts. And a lot of that is the stress of racism, that racism is an illness. It isn't just something you brush off. And so we're all suffering. We have higher, blood pressure and, you know, higher rates of many diseases. And of course, COVID now too. So there's no easy answer. Each one of you has to decide what's best for you at what stage of your career or your life. Many people retreat and say, okay, I did that. Now I want to go and I want to be able to do paintings in my house and hang out and not be on the front line. And that's fine. We need, you know, always need new people, young people, fresh blood, people in coalition together, uniting to work on certain things together, even if we don't agree on everything, on all issues.
Thank you for that. Now, Aubrey, I see Molly's got a great question, but I wanted to, before we get to that, go to the question before that by linked inclusion. I'm not sure who that person is, but they asked a question about, as a new platform, Professor Wink, for people of color and those facing exclusion, how can we amplify your voice? How can they find you, or how can they in some way get folks more information about the work and some of the stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, they, any new entity, platform, social media, just needs to contact me, right? I mean, you can Google me and you can see my email and you can contact me or others that you're seeing in the media and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Can you do whatever it is, whether it's tweeting, whether it's blogs, whether it's webinars, or, depending on the platform, to get that information out there. And everybody won't do it. Everybody will say like, no, I don't want to be a public intellectual. I'm okay doing what I do, versus someone else may say, yeah, I want to be out here because it's no good if what I'm doing is buried in some ivory tower. And meanwhile, people need this knowledge, spread out and broken down so everybody can use it, rather than it only being, for a limited number of people.
And Professor Wing, Dr. Moore, I just want to say linkedinclusion.us. So I joined the organization a few days ago, and they post some fantastic articles. And I actually contacted them, and one of their representatives was responding to me really late East Coast time and about even this, our activity tonight. And they posted it without question, just full support, full love. So I'm glad they're here. I don't know your name, but I'm glad you're here. And so everybody make sure to check them out.
And that's the thing, having the links, having the material from you all that anybody can pick up. And then, I'm on Facebook. I can't be on all the things. So, but through my Facebook feed, I see so many wonderful, programs, ads for events, get so much knowledge. And then I share it with, different people. And that's very helpful. The problem is it's overwhelming, right? Because there's so much. And then what do you do? How do you know something is accurate? That's the big thing now. Like, okay, what's fake news? And, how do we know? And, so that's the hard thing. So much news and so many sources, but I congratulate them for their, their new platform and the work I'm sure they're going to be doing to get the message out.
Okay.
Similarly to Aubrey earlier, I want to give Molly the opportunity to ask her question. It's a powerful question, and so sometimes those are better asked by the folks submitting them. Molly, would you like to unmute and present your question?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you, and just some gratitude to the folks from Gig Harbor for Racial Justice. There's a good little contingent here tonight in Chris Rufo's hometown. Yes, so our question, I think what a lot of us are really grappling with is here in Gig Harbor and across the nation, of course, our school districts have banned critical race theory without defining critical race theory, which now the anti-critical race theory folks are using in their strategies to affect the curriculum, to shut down conversations about race and racism in our schools, what little was happening before, right? So our question is, what are your recommendations for us to do? Should we take legal action?
Absolutely.
We're certainly showing up at school board meetings, but yes, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's what the law is for, right? There's a long history of using the law. So you, and this is going to be happening all over the country, right? Wherever there are districts or states that this is happening. And so there will be, or there should be, in the state, there will be an NAACP, there will be the ACLU, there will be other groups that are civil rights or civil liberties groups. And so you contact them, and it doesn't have to be just one district. It can be a whole bunch of institutions saying, we want to stop this. Can you craft a case under whatever principles, right? And to shut this down. And the problem is cases take a long time. Usually take a long time. But I was very interested. You know, Iowa is one of these nutty states that does not permit us to mandate that people wear masks in the schools. And so a lawsuit just popped up and went to federal court, and they overturned that. And they said, no, you can't do that. And so, and they used the, you know, like Americans with Disabilities Act and other acts to say, by not requiring these masks, it's violating this law, this law, and this law. And so now the different school districts in Iowa are all doing what they wanted to do, which is mandate masks. So, and that happened pretty fast. I wasn't following the case as closely as I wanted to, but there are times when it's possible to push something through in an expedited way. And so that's why you need lawyers from in the state, civil liberties lawyers who would advise you, because that's the only way to do it, right? That's the only way to do it. If you can't get the school board to back down, right? And I've heard some places the school board members are quitting because they don't want to deal with all this negativity from parents and craziness, right? So if you can't do it through the school board, then you have to do it through one of these legal ways, knowing that it could take a lot of time. But in the meanwhile, what I found when I was raising my kids is that as a Black parent, I always had to do a lot of extra education for my children, because whatever school they went to, it doesn't touch the depth of what they need to know as Black people in America about their history, et cetera. So yeah, Black History Month is nice, but that's not enough for people to get a good enough sense of their people. So I think it's incumbent on parents too, right? Not parents alone, parents with the school system, but for parents in places, if at the moment you can't do something, well, we can't just let that go. Just like there are people who have Sunday schools and Saturday schools and Chinese language, Mandarin schools and things that people do outside of their Monday to Friday school to enhance the knowledge of those children. And so different groups locally may say, okay, we're going to open this up and have a school, an Afrocentric Saturday school, and do some things while you're still fighting these battles so that the children don't end up in total ignorance or absorbing the nonsense because of the system.
It's quite appropriate that you mentioned school alternatives. I think we just saw recently an announcement by Hannah Nicole Jones to open her own school, actually in Waterloo, Iowa, I believe.
Right.
As a way to continue to provide some options to some of what I think we're going to continue to see. I was wanting to ask you a little bit about CRT in reference to young people. You're a parent, grandparent. I mean, I think we've often battled with, do we talk about race with our kids? What age do we talk about it? CRT, I mean, what's your sense based on what's been happening this last year or two? What would you advise for parents to say to young people about this topic, about this time in reference to CRT and some of the pushback we're getting? It's important for us to announce we're on the almost nearing the eve of the insurrection, or at least some time in which they're going to be gathering, it seems like. But it's all had me thinking about, what do I say to my 4-year-old, my 11-year-old about this time? So just asking you to put on the mama, grandma hat and give folks some advice around young people in this topic, this time we're in.
My view as a teacher is that concepts should be able to be broken down to even small children based on whatever they can absorb, right? So obviously you're not going to sit down with a 4-year-old and say the social construction of race is blah, 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 right? But it could be that, you know, let's say that child is Muslim or Arab, and at Halloween, people are wearing these costumes that are making fun of them, right? And so you would want to say to the child, these people that are calling you, you know, whatever horrible names, these are bad people, you're not this, you are positive, you know. And so depending on their age and stage of development, because sometimes some very young children can understand complex things, you can, you know, aim what you're doing all the way up through high school or college. And there's plenty of adults who have a degree in something and yet are clueless about these issues and will need the education that you all are helping to provide. And so I've done Sunday school, you know, in Christian denominations, and I have relatives who are Jewish, I have relatives who are Muslim, and so I can take a concept and I'll put it with the scripture for that denomination. Right? And if that's Sunday school, if that's a religious day and they're trying to teach the children the scripture, let's say thou shalt not kill. If every religion has something like that, okay, well, let's look at that scripture and for that age and explain the concept, rather than say it's a violation of the, you know, International Convention on Civil and Political Rights to put people to death who are under 18 years old when they committed the crime. You know, no, they're not going to relate to that. But if you say God said, thou shalt not, you know, so you do it through whatever you're supposed to use in the environment that you are. And of course, it takes work. And also your children, most of you on here may be parents, but you know, children, it's not what you say, it's what you do. And there's a lot of people saying, oh yeah, you know, I'm a good, whatever their denomination is. And the kid sees all of the negative things that the parent is doing, and how selfish or how racist. And so the kid will check that out. So you have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk if you hope you're going to actually influence your kids to have certain principles that you hope they will live by.
Dr. Moore, we have a question from Tabitha. Tabitha, do you want to ask your question or would you like me to read it? Just come off mute if you'd like to ask it. Okay, I'll start reading, but feel free to join in. The question is, or statement, so to clarify, we are saying the reason CRT is being rejected everywhere is based on the misconception that it's all about white shaming, just trying to make white people feel bad. I don't understand how facts and real history and movements and all this energy for equity could be seen as, quote, they're just trying to shame white people, end quote. Wow.
Yeah, that's a great question. They're throwing everything at the wall, right? So they say, oh, this is shaming us. This is saying we're racist. This is saying this, all those things, those misconceptions. They'll throw out 20 misconceptions, and, you know, some writers, some speakers, some school board will pick 2 of them and say, aha, we hate this because of this. And so the attack on it is complex, right? Whatever resonates with a particular audience. Yeah, you're trying to make me feel bad as a white person. It's nothing about making you feel bad as a white person. It's like, how can we all work together toward justice for everyone, right? That's not trying to make anybody feel bad. That's actually trying to make people feel good. So of course that takes people listening to what you're trying to say, which they may not be able to do. So in other words, you can't try to say, oh, the people attacking are just doing one thing. They're doing many things. So that's why I'm saying when you give back speech, you use whatever language whoever you're talking to is, whether it's religious language, human rights language, the language of whatever their organization is. So you have people who are libertarian, you have people who are communists, you have whatever's in their ideology that they endorse. I'm sure there's a way I can take that ideology and say, okay, under your ideology, people are supposed to have freedom, but that means also not treading on other people's freedom, right? And so then you use their ideology to make the point because they have endorsed a particular ideology.
Professor Wing, I actually have a question. So with critical race theory, right, before today, I had an idea of what critical race theory was, but not a solid idea. So that means that the majority of people, especially the opponents, probably don't have a solid idea. Are we seeing a lot of the resistance from the usual don't tear down the Confederate statues, you're disrespecting the flag types? Or is it a larger group of opponents than just the usual suspects, we'll call them?
Well, you know, what was it? 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. Those 70 million people, for instance, just using that set, have many different views on many different topics, right? Some segment of them may be like, don't take down the Confederate monument. But other people have some other issue, right? So it's not just one type of person. And there could even be liberal people who are like, you know, why do we have to talk about race? Why can't we all just get along? And they will, some of the people who are conservative and liberal will invoke Martin Luther King's line about we should be judged by the content of our character and not the color of our skin. So they will flip that, whatever he was talking about, for their purpose. And so it's like, okay, well, from the beginning, race was part of our country, right? Black people couldn't vote. They were property. Women were property. The Native Americans, I mean, that's from the founding. Those things haven't just like gone away, right? So we have to talk about the things because they were around from the past and they're around right now. And I think a lot of us are in shock, right? About how around they are. Things we would have thought vanished when President Obama was elected. My state, Iowa, voted for Obama in our caucuses twice. We were the state that started the nation to know who was Obama, and we had the first caucus. So how our state could go from 90-some% white people who voted for Obama to then flipping now and having the majority of them voting for Trump. You know, like, what's the mindset there that could turn these same people from being willing to give a Black man with a name Barack Hussein Obama a chance to be president and then flip to this other type of person who is the antithesis of the principles Obama was hoping to espouse? And there's critiques of Obama, right? And there are critical race theorists who would make critiques of Obama and say, well, he wasn't really aiming to help Black people. He was helping all Americans. Black people actually didn't do better. So there are critiques of Obama, but just looking at him compared to the last inhabitant of the White House before the current one.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to ask you is about 75 presentations this last couple of years and all that's been going on. I mean, as you look over this time in maybe a 2 to 3 year period, what have you learned about yourself or the state of the world? How are you, if you had to explain it to your grandkids 25 years, what is your summary of where we are now, how we're doing now, and looking ahead?
Well, it's pretty interesting because, you know, I said I'm 65 and I'm thinking of retiring when I'm 70, which, believe it or not, is young for a law professor. Many of them go up into the 70s. So I thought, okay, this last 5 years, I'm going to do a few speeches, do a little bit of this and that, and then I'm going to just kind of ease out into retirement. But instead, all of these attacks on everything that I've been doing for the bulk of my career have actually energized me, right? So I'm not going to just slink out the back and let other people do it. And I endorse one of Professor Derek Bell's other statements. He has many fabulous ones. What is that? Racial progress is cyclical. It doesn't just go straight forward. So you have a period after slavery, okay, the Black men got the vote, then in Reconstruction, then you ended Reconstruction and you go all the way from Plessy 1896 up to Brown v. Board. Okay, we have this great case, blah, blah, blah. And then, so you have these periods of 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, or 1 step back. And so that's the nature of racial and other types of progress. So if you understand that, it's like, okay, so at this moment of my 40 years or however long I'll have it working, it's like I may be at a part where there's a few steps forward, which the civil rights movement represented, which, many things that happened, many laws and Obama and different things. But then there's these other things that go back, and you can think of Ronald Reagan and of course the Bushes and Trump, and so that's the nature of it. And I'll be committed to it. I think I got enough energy to go for as long, maybe not all the way until I just keel over, but certainly I got energy. And like I say, I have to get that energy in part from doing things like this, and also from my children, grandchildren, and the thousands of students, law students I have taught over the 35 years who've gone off and become legislators and judges and partners and government officials and professors and deans and presidents. And that's very spirit warming to know, after I've moved out the picture, that all these generations I've taught will be making their mark in different ways. And some of them leave law and they decide to become authors or journalists or artists or other things, but they make contributions, to our society and trying to make it better. And it doesn't have to be everybody, right, that does that. We just need some people. So think of Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, first Black to get a PhD from Harvard, 1896. There was no Black student union, right? He looked to the left, he looked to the right, he said, it's on me. And look what he did up until age 90, creating the NAACP, creating, or the sociology about Black people. So it's entirely incredible things. So if even, every 1/10 of us, he had this 1/10 idea that has been criticized, but if even every 10th of us was able to do 1/10 of what he did, that is progress, right? Even if you get a pushback.
We had a question here from Craig that I want to read to you and see what your thoughts are on this. And he says, I'm finding anti-CRT folks discovering anti-CRT apologists like John McWhorter. How do you counter anti-CRT intellectuals?
It's like anything else. You counter it with more speech, right? I mean, whether they're a professor or whether they're the guy that was trying to do the recall against the governor of California, and they had this Black guy out there doing that. So you just come back at them with other speech. There's going to be people of every color along a spectrum. When Thurgood Marshall was leaving the bench, the Supreme Court, and his replacement was Clarence Thomas, he said, there's white snakes and there's black snakes and they both bite. So he was just making it known, just because it was a Black man on the Supreme Court like him, this next one has not been like him. It's been the opposite of him. So you're going to have people like that from every background. So you just call them out, call them out. You don't call them out, and it could be a white person or a Black person, the Asian or Latinx person who could think, on this side of the fence or that side. So you can't essentialize and say, oh, all the white people think like this, or all the Asians think like this. No, we know it's complex how people think and how they think over their lifetime, how they may be when they were 18, when they were the rabble rouser, an anti-war movement, and how they are at 60 when they, own stock in all of the arms corporations. That could be that same person over a lifetime, becoming the opposite of whatever he or she might have been when they were young. And then some people become more radical. They just keep going. People like Ralph Nader and other people who stayed, on one side in whatever they were doing from when they were young.
Well, we have about 6 minutes left, so that's not much time. Maybe one more question. I don't know if anybody wants to raise a hand or unmute. I was gonna submit for the group a picture of one of the people that continues to inspire me, that's still living today, that wasn't so far, not so long ago when Ruby Bridges broke into so many barriers as a little girl. I mean, if I can just have a fraction of her courage in the work that I'm doing day to day, that's really what's inspiring me when I think about ancestors, living ancestors. And Professor Wing, for you to know, even though I didn't take a class from you, I have been motivated and inspired by you since the time I met you. And again, just want to say publicly how much I've appreciated you always supporting me and my work. And just really grateful for you coming on tonight and really just shedding some light on a topic that I know for myself, even though I feel like I got some, like Aubrey said, some knowledge, my knowledge has been expanded and I still got so much to know, but thank you for dropping that here tonight. Barbara, I'm gonna pass it to you in these last 4 minutes so that if you have any closing remarks, I wanna give you some time to be able to do that. But if y'all can just help me emoji one more time, Professor Adrian Wing, I would really appreciate it. Just show some love for the professor dropping knowledge on us here tonight. Barbara Phillips, I'm handing it back to you, family, and thanking you again for this opportunity, just for us to be learning and listening to one of the greatest minds, I think, on the planet around this topic. Barbara Phillips.
Wow, that was powerful. Very powerful. Thank you. I learned a lot, very engaging. It's just been wonderful. And thank you, Dr. Moore, for help coordinating this and my other team members that are online right now. Melvin, Dr. Moore, Aubrey, Nichelle. So it's just been great to be able to host this event and have a learning environment. I wanted to say our next event, which is self-care, is September 30th, and we'll be posting that also. But anyone that has any last comments or just like to share any particular thoughts, I'll turn it over to the group and they can share. Aubrey, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Barb.
Okay, so anyone else would like to share any last thoughts or just thank you?
Yeah, you just may have to come off mute, but I want to say thank you. Thank you, Professor Wing. Thank you, everybody. Dr. Moore, Barbara. So the video of tonight's event will be posted on our website. That's wacnc.org. You can find that if you go back to the Eventbrite, you can find it on the Eventbrite. If you saw it on the Facebook, just come to our Facebook page and I'll make sure it's posted for everyone.
Okay, I see Nichelle popped in. We're gonna take it off mute, Nichelle.
Okay, I've been here. This has been totally awesome. Thank you so much. I learned so much today. Appreciate everybody coming on board this afternoon. And this has been an awesome topic. Thank you so much. Learned so much today.
Thank you all. It's been my pleasure, and I hope to see you again, whether virtually or in some new abnormal world where I can see people in person, but it's been powerful. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Wing. I really appreciate it, and we'll talk soon. And thank you everyone for participating. Be safe. And if you, I wanted to ask about the slides. Can we get the
I'll
slides and post it?
I'll email the slides. Yeah.
Okay,
You get posted separate from the, from the video.
right.
Okay.
So we'll do that. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Wing will be in touch. Take care. Be safe.
All right. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still some hanging in there. Or they might have fallen asleep.
Thanks, Doc.
Right. It's great, right? You guys, maybe you've already had your dinner. For me, it's past my bedtime now. I'm a morning person, but I'll sleep well.
That's right. I understand that.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, have a good night. But Eddie and Aubrey, Melvin, are you still there? No, he dropped off.
I think he dropped. I don't see him.
No, he dropped off.
Yeah.
Well, we can chat another time. We can set up something later, okay, before the next meeting.
That'd be great.
Okay.
That'd be great. And I'll get in touch with Ricky just to make sure he's got the next date on his calendar, and hopefully you feel good about tonight. I know I felt good.
Oh, great.
Great. It'll be hard to top the previous three, but I think we got another good one coming.
Okay, great.
All
I'm
right.
excited.
All right, I gotta go. I think my daddy duty bell is ringing.
All right, Dr. Moore.
Right.
Much love, y'all. Appreciate you.
Take
All right, good to
care.
see you,
Thanks.
brothers.
Okay. All right. Good night, Aubrey. I'm gonna leave the office now.
Okay, Barb.
All right. Good night.
All right, good night.